I'm very intrigued by how you talk about the ancient Greeks and their pedagogical view of love.
Yes, I mean, that's fascinating because one of the greatest insults that you can level at a lover in the modern world, apparently, is to say, I want to change you. And one of the most, offended moments in relationships are when somebody says, are you trying to change me? And this is seen as absolutely the enemy of love. It's like, my goodness, I thought you loved me, but now I've realized you're trying to change me. So that means you don't love me. And this, look, it sounds very normal in our own time. It would have sounded extremely unusual to the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks had a view of love which was essentially based around education. That what love means, love is a benevolent process whereby two people try to teach each other how to become the best versions of themselves.
Now you say somewhere they're committed to increasing the admirable characteristics that they possess,
that's right.
And that they possess and the other person possesses.
And that what love is...
Which is a twist on changing you. I mean, it is...
Yes, no, absolutely. And so the Greek view is you fall in love with the perfect things in another person, with the accomplished, beautiful things. But then the work of love is to try and make more and more of a person accomplished, perfect, virtuous. That's what love aims at. So love explicitly aims at change. Now, many relationships and their troubles could be analyzed as attempts by both people to teach one another things, but failing to do so miserably. So many what we call arguments are really lessons that have gone terribly wrong. And they go wrong really for two reasons. Firstly, because the so-called, in inverted commas, teacher, the person in the teaching role, is so panicked, so anxious. And they're anxious because at the back of their minds they think, the haunting thought that makes people lose their tempers in relationship is basically the fear that they've married an idiot, that they've ruined their life by being in the presence of someone who just refuses to understand. So they lose their temper.
And so also just those terrifying moments when you start to understand. I mean, what was it? What was that line from On Love? Every fall into love invites false triumph of hope over knowledge. And as the knowledge becomes more front and center, that kind of... You're right. It's that the deterioration of that ideal can be terrifying.
That's right. Yeah. And so people are trying to teach one another things, but with impatience, with anger, with a sense of bitterness, and
with
meanwhile,
fear they can't even own up to, probably.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And so they're terrible ambassadors for their feeling. They're making a mess of it. And meanwhile, the person on the other side, in the so-called pupil role, in the student role, is beset by this idea that it's an insult. The whole game is an insult because it involves an attempt to change. So both people are incredibly twitchy and angry and tense about the whole situation, and the lesson goes nowhere. And what you end up with is, bitterness on both sides. You get the person who, rather than attempting to teach gently, just attempts to impose their will in a kind of managerial and strict way, and the other person just runs away and shirks and just doesn't want to listen and just shuts their ears. So that's what relationships so often end up as: failed teaching moments.
There's your most recent book on this subject is The Course of Love, which is a novel, but it's a novel that actually I feel you kind of weave a pedagogical narrator voice into it. Do you think that's fair?
That's right, absolutely.
Woven into the narrative, and and so this is an example of what you're describing, and you say at one point this is the relationship between Robbie and Kirsten, and you said at one point their relationship is secretly yet mutually marked by a project of improvement, which I think we all recognize. So, in fact, we do have this pedagogical instinct, but we don't think we're supposed to, as you say. And then there's this moment where you say, after the dinner party, Robbie is sincerely trying to bring about an evolution in the personality of the wife he loves. But his chosen technique is distinctive: to call Kirsten materialistic, to shout at her, and then later to slam two doors.
That's right. And of course, by the time
and we all recognize that scene.
By the time we've humiliated someone, they're not going to learn anything. The only conditions, as we know with children, the only conditions under which anyone learns are conditions of incredible sweetness, tenderness, patience. That's how we learn. But the problem is that, the failures of our relationships have made us so anxious that we can't be the teachers we should be. And therefore, some often, genuine, legitimate things that we want to get across are just, come across as insults, as attempts to wound, and are therefore rejected, and, the arteries of the relationship start to fur.
Yeah. Someone recently said to me, I'm curious about how you respond to this. It was a wise Jewish mother who had said to them, men marry women with the intention that with the idea that they will stay the same. Women marry men with the idea that they will change, which is obviously a huge generalization, but it made a lot of sense to me, even in terms of my own life and in terms of what I see around me.
Yeah, I would argue that both genders want to change one another, and they both have an idea of who the lover should be.
Right.
And I think, a useful exercise that sometimes psychologists, level at feuding couples is they say things like, if you could accept that your partner would never change, how would you feel about that? And the idea is to bring about a kind of forgiveness, because so often what gets us both, feeling desperate but also excited about change is the sense it could be different. Sometimes pessimism, a certain degree of pessimism, can be a friend of love. Yeah. Once we accept that actually it's really very hard for people to be another way, we're sometimes readier. We don't need people to be perfect, is the good news. We just need people to be able to explain their imperfections to us in good time before they've hurt us too much with them, and with a certain degree of humility. That's already an enormous step. It's
a lot to ask, but it sounds reasonable, right? I mean, if we could really have that in our minds early enough on in a relationship.
That's right. And almost from the first date, my view of what one should talk about on a first date is not showing off and not, putting forward one's accomplishments, but almost quite the opposite. One should say, well, how are you crazy? I'm crazy like this.
Right.
And there should be a mutual acceptance that two damaged people are trying to get together, because pretty much all of us, there are a few totally healthy people, but pretty much all of us reach dating age with, some scars, some wounds. And of course, the more we know about them and the more we're able to introduce the topic in a kind of non-pejorative, non-agitated way, the more success we'll have. But we're operating, it's not a coincidence that people in the early days of love call each other angel. We've got this sort of deity, this sort of secularized deity, who is our lover, who then turns out, not to be such a thing. And we rage and rant. I mean, look, a lot of this comes from ideas that we have in childhood. When we're children, our parents can sometimes seem like supernatural creatures. They have powers way beyond anything we have. They know all sorts of things, etc. And sometimes we bring to adult relationships some of the same hope that a young child might have had of their parent. And of course, an adult relationship can't be like that. It's got to accept that the person across the table or on the other side of the bed is just human, which means full of flaws, fears, right, etc., and not some sort of superhuman.
Yeah, and I think that question that you said could be a standard question on an early date. And how are you crazy? There's also something that you're getting at that it almost seems like we must be hardwired to do this. Although, one of the wonderful things we're learning in the 21st century is that we can change our brains. But a way you say it in On Love, in a scene in On Love is, actually, let me just look at it. Boy meets girl, and you start to be enamored in details of this new person and find things in common. Like, I don't know, both of us had 2 large freckles on the toe of the left foot. And then he wrote, instinctively, and this happens very quickly, he teases out an entire personality from the details. But also also what I know from my own life is you tend to, and I think we when we fall in love with another person, we magnify in our minds those things that are immediately enrapturing, and craft our idea of the other person almost exclusively around those wonderful qualities, which is not fair to them or to us.
That's right. And we feel in a way that we know them already, and we impose on them an idea.
Of course we don't. Right.
And we don't.
Right.
We don't. Which,
right.
Also explains another phenomenon that I'm fascinated by, you probably would have noticed in both novels, is the phenomenon of being in a sulk, of sulking. Because sulking is a fascinating situation which takes you right into the heart of certain romantic delusions. Because what's fascinating about sulking is that we don't sulk with everybody. We only get into sulks with people that we feel should understand us, but rather unforgivably haven't understood us. So in other words, it's when we are in love with people and they're in love with us that we take particular offense when they get things wrong. Because the kind of the governing assumption of the relationship is this person should know what's in my mind, ideally without me needing to tell them. If I need to spell this out to you, you don't love me. And that's why, you'll go into the bathroom, bolt the door, and when your partner says, is anything wrong, you'll go, mm-mm. And the reason is that they should be able to read through the bathroom panel into your soul and know what's wrong. And that's such an extraordinary demand. And,
so
we see it in children. I mean, this is how little children behave. They literally think that their parents can read their minds. It takes a long time to realize that the only way that one person can really learn about another is if it's explained to them, preferably using words, quite calm ones.
Use your words, which we say to children.
When people always say communicate, I mean, we have to be generous towards the reasons why we don't, and we don't because we're operating with this mad idea that true love means intuitive understanding. And I go crazy when people say things like, "I met someone, the loveliest thing is they understood me without me needing to speak." And I thought, so many alarm bells go off when I hear that, because I think, okay, well, good luck good luck in this instance. But, if you guys get together, that's not going to go on forever. No one can, intuitively understand another beyond a quite limited range of topics.
Right. Your children, how old are your children? They're still pretty young, right?
They're 10 and 12 now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So as now that I have young adult children, it's, you when you hear that coming out of the mouth of your 21-year-old, he should know.
Right.
He should just know.
Right.
And but I also what I also know is that grasping this, what you're talking about it is the work of life, right?
It's the work of love. And, but it's interesting that you're mentioning your children and children generally, because I think it sounds eerie, but I think that one of the kindest things that we can do with our lover is to see them as children, and not to infantilize them, but when we're dealing with children as parents, as adults, we're incredibly generous in the way we interpret their behavior. And if you walk home and a child says, "I hate you," right? You immediately go, okay, that's not quite true. Probably they're tired, they're hungry, something's gone wrong, their tooth hurts, something. We're looking around for a benevolent interpretation that can just shave off some of the more, depressing, dispiriting aspects of their behavior. And we do this naturally with children, and yet we do it so seldom with adults. When an adult meets an adult, and they say, I don't know, "I've not had a good day, leave me alone," rather than saying, okay, I'm just going to go behind the facade of this slightly depressing comment.
And understand that that's actually not about me. That's about what's going on inside them today.
Right, exactly. We don't do that. We take it all completely personally. And so I think, the work of love is to try, when we can manage it, we can't always, to go behind the front of this rather, depressing, challenging behavior and try and ask where it might have come from. I mean, this is traditionally in Christianity, this is what, God does. God looks behind the dispiriting surface of someone. Someone is an alcoholic, a prostitute, etc. And ordinary people shun them. But, God's love looks behind the scenes. And we find this in literature too. Think of Dostoevsky's characters. They are often very damaged people, gamblers, alcoholics, murderers. But the skill and the love of the novelist is to take you behind and show you what lies behind that behavior. And look, we can't do it every day, but at least to know that is an important part of what love is, what love should be. Love is doing that work to ask oneself, where's this come from? Where's this rather aggressive, pained, non-communicative, unpleasant behavior come from? If we can do that, we're on the road to knowing a little bit about what love really is, I think.
You know, I'd love to talk about you used this word pessimism a little while ago, and I'd love to dig into that a little bit more. And what you're really talking about is being reality based, as opposed to being ideal based. There's a beautiful video that I've shared that's out there called I think it's The Darkest Truth About Love. Is that right? That's the title.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. Yes, made that for YouTube. Yeah.
I'd like to talk through, some of these core truths that fly in the face of this way we go around behaving, and that movies have taught us to behave, and that possibly our parents taught us to behave.
Yes.
These core truths that can put us on the foundation of reality.
Yes, I mean, that's very useful. We could chisel them in granite. I mean, look, one of the first important truths is you're crazy. Not you, as it were, all of us. That all of us are deeply damaged people.
Right.
The great enemy of love, good relationships, good friendships is self-righteousness. And self-righteousness is rooted in a sense of our own purity. If we start by accepting that, of course, we're, only just holding it together and in many ways really quite challenging people, I think if somebody thinks that they're easy to live with, they're by definition going to be pretty hard and don't have much of an understanding of themselves. I think, there's a certain wisdom that begins by knowing that, of course, you, like everyone else, is pretty difficult. And of course, this knowledge is very shielded from us. Our parents don't tell us, our ex-lovers, they knew it, but they couldn't be bothered to tell us. They sacked us without.
Well, by the time they tell us, we're dismissing what they say. Anyway.
Well, that's right, exactly. Or they were too sweet. They didn't want to reform us. They were just wanted to get out. So they didn't tell us. And our friends don't tell us because they just want a pleasant evening with us. So we're left with a sort of a bubble of ignorance about our own natures. And often, you can be way into your 40s before you're starting to get a sense of, oh, well, maybe some of the problem is in me, because of course, it's so intuitive to think that of course it's the other person. So to begin with that sense of, for whatever reason, things to do with childhood and development, etc., I'm quite tricky in these ways. That's a very important starting point for being good at love. The other thing, of course, is to realize that anyone that we could get together with is also going to be deeply flawed, that there is no such thing as a perfect person. And I think the essence of romantic longing is this belief that someone out there, maybe you saw them at the airport check-in line, maybe you crossed them in the supermarket, maybe you saw them when you were swiping left or right on the app, but that somewhere out there is this extraordinary feature called the right person, and that the right person is going to be someone who understands you, who's on your side, who is extremely benevolent towards everything that you are and feel and want, and that they're out there, and that so often we blame our lovers, we don't blame our view of love, and so we keep sacking our lovers and blowing up relationships in pursuit of this idea of love, which actually has no basis in reality. It's simply not rooted in anything we know. I mean,
this right person, this creature does not exist.